Welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. I'm Roshan Cariappa. There have been tremendous developments in AI, but it's also extremely hard to find a use case, paying customers, or even a large enough market to take your innovation to market. That's really what makes Match Street Den so unique and special. In this conversation, I spoke to Ashwini Asokan, the co-founder and CEO of Match Street Den, about the various nuances of building an AI startup, from finding product market fit to storytelling to customer success and more. Along the way, we also discussed India's thriving SaaS ecosystem, operating in retail during COVID, and her advice to doing the 0 to 1 journey. I really enjoyed this conversation, as I'm sure you will too, so do stick around. Hi, Ashwini. Welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Hi, Roshan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this conversation, and I'm glad that we can catch up. So just for some brief context to our listeners, could you take us through the founding journey of Match Street Den and some key milestones along the way?
Yeah, we could do that. My co-founders and I, all three of us, spent much of our early career in the Bay Area. Both my co-founders come from very, very academic backgrounds. They're both neuroscientists. I come from a product and a product design background. And we'd been talking about this company for a fairly long period of time. And I think we knew that we really were going to go down the path of building kind of an AI platform that would much closely mirror the way, and I think saying human brain is a bit of a stretch given where we are and where that vision has been beaten to death just in terms of where everybody wants to go. But it's one of those things where we were really interested in taking AI from highly controlled situations and contexts and out into the wild, right? In a very scalable manner, where it can be used by, people working in any kind of industry in a meaningful way, to apply it, kind of in a fairly meaningful way. A very, very broad goal and mission that we started this journey with. At some level today, I would say MSD's mission is to make everybody an AI native. That is the company's motto and mission. And, to that effect, we started our journey. We, two of us moved back to India. The other one still stays in California. And the reason we came back home to Chennai is because we believe Chennai is the deep tech home. And we wanted to come back to the source for the talent and for hiring and building out our AI talent here. So we kind of set up shop between the US and Chennai, and we got going, but very quickly realized that a horizontal play in 2015, 2016, we were way ahead of the curve to build out a platform approach. And we said, okay, let's just actually go to market in a vertical approach first, right? And most horizontals are born out of vertical companies. And so we said, we kind of launched Vue.ai towards the end of 2016 as our vertically integrated AI stack for the retail industry, right? And that basically meant end-to-end retail automation. We handle everything from automating, merchandising, warehousing, styling, outfitting, photography, and really kind of bringing together inventory data, customer data, and business data, right? And powering anything that literally sits at the intersection of those three pillars. 4 years in, we're getting ready to launch our platform. So we've come a full circle, and we are now ready to go cross-industry, across verticals. And our horizontal is getting ready, and we're already actually quietly in the market, but we will be making, a formal announcement, hopefully once this COVID madness settles a bit.
Right. That's a very interesting thing you mentioned, right? Which is starting out vertical and then moving to the horizontal, because usually, people start off by being everything for everyone and, kind of focus in on one very specific use case, industry, business, and kind of build for that, right? In a very deep stack kind of a fashion. Can you talk a little bit about, some of the decision making in terms of first choosing to go, picking a vertical and then going horizontal? What has that been like?
Sure. Again, back in 2015, 2016, when we were just getting started with our journey and trying to figure out what to do, there weren't too many deep tech companies to begin with, right? And we're talking about computer vision led, right? And for us, it was a bunch of things. We iterated, we experimented fairly heavily in that period of our journey. We took our platform to gaming companies. We went to self-driving cars, analytics, retail. We went to a large set of industries, right, to try and see where could this truly be horizontal, or do we need to kind of take a vertical approach? And it became very clear that the horizontal approach was not going to work at all. I mean, like, people were like, "What are you talking about?" Right? It was really Greek and Latin, I think, at that point, as we were trying to go to the market and trying to sell. Became very evident to us that that approach was not the right approach, and most industries were not even ready. You're talking about infra not being ready, right? To be able to handle videos and image processing of that scale, in the cloud, and was way ahead of kind of its time, I think. But as we kind of started to experiment on the gaming side, a lot of the companies were like, just give us the game. We don't have, the bandwidth. We're going to have to overhaul entire infrastructure to make this happen. Instead, why don't you just build these ideas into a game and just give it to us? And we were like, we're not game developers. We're not going to be doing this. And so very quickly, it became clear to us that retail was just solid, right? The pull from the retail market for us was very, very evident. And so we started kind of going to market with the initial part of it, very, very much leaning into the customer data, end of things from a use case perspective. Very quickly realized, right, like a classic enterprise company. And we've been set up as an enterprise company from the get-go. Became very clear to us that that's our DNA. Enterprise sales is the DNA of the company by default. And we realized very quickly that, we were able to find new use cases, right? So as you're going and talking to a product manager, as you're talking to an e-commerce manager, as you're talking to catalog managers, you start to realize their problems, right? Like any classic enterprise company, we very quickly discovered adjacent use cases in the warehouses, in the cataloging side, in the photography studio, so on and so forth. And we had built a beast of a product engine, I would say, and technical and product engine. And within a period of, like 3 years, we ended up creating an entire suite of applications on top of our platform. And I would argue, there are lots of companies out there that start with one thing, right? Like that's the holy grail of all things startup, right? Which is like, pick that one use case, and then, before you can do multiple other features and stuff like that. I would argue our journey was the exact opposite of that in some ways. And that's not to say that, not any one thing is useful for us. It just created a fantastic roadmap of land and expand, right? The ability to quickly get in and show some value with AI, right? And not just hand waving, not just like AI or hype that you read in the media, but to actually show concrete value using AI, and then saying, oh, by the way, you can do this and this and this and this, right? And it just becomes one of those stories where people just start to realize that AI has become a fabric of their business and of the way the company itself works, and it's less about a feature somewhere that someone is using.
Right. No, that's very interesting, I think, because oftentimes it becomes a hammer in search of a nail when you hand this over to people, because they're not really sure where they can apply it, what it'll take to kind of build this out, and so on and so forth. So you kind of built the use case for them, and now you're kind of expanding from there, right? So I'd love to ask more questions about Match Street then, but I have one question about your role as an interaction designer itself. Around 2008, 2009, I discovered Randy Pausch and the last lecture. And around the same time, a friend of mine left to do design at Carnegie Mellon as well. So I've always been fascinated by the work that interaction designers do, especially in deep tech, because I think it's such a hard thing to, mask complexity, right? It's so could you just talk about your work as an interaction designer and how that's helped you with Match Street then?
I would say, my life as a grad student at CMU was eye-opening. And interestingly, though, interaction design was not exactly the path that I ended up holding on to graduating. I think what ended up becoming more my thing was the user and design research side of things. So while I did get my degree in interaction design, as I left Carnegie Mellon, unlike almost all my peers that graduated with me that went to like Twitter or YouTube or Google, I ended up going to Intel, which kind of made almost all my peers like scratch their heads. This is early 2000s, and people were like, "Why would you go to Intel when you got a degree in interaction? What does Intel want to do with you?" But I ended up meeting this just this just mad anthropologist, and who was my boss, who ended up being my boss at Intel, and who was building this highly multidisciplinary organization of like AI folks, like, HCI folks, designers, anthropologists, cultural researchers. It was this melting pot of just like insane disciplines coming together to help Intel think about smart TVs of the future, smartphones, smart cars, so on and so forth, right? And I would argue MSD is very much modeled along the vision of Genevieve Bell and what I got to live in her organization. And so to me, in some ways, interaction design was the starting point of that journey. But I think what came together was the realization, and very much MSD has been modeled around this thing that designers, product people, AI people, engineers, marketers, it's like there is no way you can conceive a product without these people being together. And I think that's probably what people miss the most at MSD since this COVID period started, is just, you'll just find the physical spaces just overflowing with people just talking to each other about what just happened, and from a customer perspective, and the requirements and the new ideas that it spawns for the product. And I think what happens when design and understand what is design. Design is simply just an understanding of how people function, and then creating stuff that mirrors in some way, what it is that people desire, what they're motivated by, inspired by, right? It's almost like the coming together of the things around you, the experiences around you, and your, how you experience that as a human. And I think that's broadly what I would say design gave me. It gave me that starting point to, we used to have a professor at CMU who always used to say, the end goal of design, everything ends in organizational design, right? Like that's the ultimate form of design. And I would argue that I'm living it. I would argue that I'm absolutely living that dream, right? All of us obviously, I used to scratch my head. I was 21 when I went to school there, and not a lot of that didn't mean a lot of, a whole lot to me back then. But as I reflect now, I would say those design principles have come all the way now to the point of organizational design and what it means to actually run a company across so many geos, doing so many things in a space where most people still don't understand what AI can do for them, right? And that is the reality, which means it's all about simplifying and simplifying and simplifying, AI to a point where you almost don't want people to know, other than the ethical aspects of letting people know. You don't want people to think that having an AI is something, alien in some form, right? That it just has to become a fabric of their DNA.
This episode is brought to you by Mulya. You want to move fast? Sure. But without breaking things? Now that's a hard ask. The thing is, once you have some base of users and customers, you just cannot afford to risk quality. So how do the likes of Cred, Swiggy and CureFit, some of India's fastest growing startups, ship at lightning pace and delight their users and customers? Simple, they're working with Mulya as a strategic quality partner. Mulya is India's most talented and passionate community of testers. They've helped prevent thousands of bugs and regression issues. So as a CTO or a product owner, if you want to reduce tech debt, especially while you scale, do check out Mulya.com. I've interviewed Mulya's founder and CEO Pradeep on the podcast earlier, and we spoke about how startups can improve quality while scaling and things to that effect. You should definitely check it out. I'll link to it in the description below. Now back to your regular programming. Right. I think the coolest things happen at the overlaps of disciplines or functions and so on, right? I mean, I think in that sense, what you said makes a lot of sense. So MadStreet then today has multiple products, right? So there's Vue and there's Blocks as well. So and you briefly spoke about how both of them have come to be. How do you manage to focus the company around two different sort of products? I mean, there might be an underlying sort of a theme and a mission, but how do you focus different teams around all of this?
Yeah, for us, we look at it as different pillars more than anything else, right? It's the same teams that are doing everything, by the way. These are not different teams. These are not entirely different businesses. These are basically like one underlying platform, which is catering to different industries, in a way that is relevant for that industry. That's broadly it, right? So it's less about looking at it as everybody's doing something different. And it's more about the fact that at the end of the day, regardless of what kind of a business you are, you have a certain set of things that you have to do, right? And you'd be surprised, right? Just like people across the globe, we love to think of everybody geographically as being wildly different from geo to geo. But at the end of the day, I think we're all humans. We all have some very common desires. We all have some very common, sense of purpose, where we're all headed, so on and so forth. And I think businesses are broadly the same, right? Everybody has something to sell. Everybody has someone to sell to, and everybody has processes and an organization with people that come together to do a certain set of things, right? And AI has context. AI has value to add in all of those different types of contexts. And so we have actually designed our organization to kind of draw from tech that is core to everything, right? So it's the tech of the company, which is definitely at the core DNA of the company. The tech really grounds us in a very singular thing, right? Which is understanding what is the kind of data that is coming in, how all those pieces of data speak to each other, and what do they, generate, right? Depending on the question you're asking the system, it can basically form relationships between all the different types of data and give an answer. On the product side, however, we organize ourselves based on products, right? So we've got a series of different types of products, and we don't always differentiate by industry. Most times it's just a common kind of a need or a problem which will serve multiple industries, right? I'll give you an example here is tagging. Tagging is a great example, right? On the retail side, that's product tagging. In another place, it's video tagging, right? If it's an entertainment or a media company, right? If it's healthcare, it's basically you're detecting some kind of a disease or, a condition, right? So it's broadly the same, regardless of where you go. Underlying what is different is the data and the models that we have on top of it. So the team in some ways is split by the products that they're working on. But from a go-to-market perspective, there's only one team. There's only one sales team, one marketing team that works across all of this stuff. So
very interesting. Earlier you said something like enterprise is in the DNA, right? What does it mean to have it in your DNA? I mean, simplify that for people who are listening.
Yeah, I see so many SaaS companies out there in the market today, especially as someone who's very actively investing. Like I get to see like tons of companies come and go, every week that I look at. And for me, I often ask myself how many of these companies are features and how many of these companies are businesses, right? And sooner or later, and we're already seeing that happen. I mean, look at Freshdesk and look at Freshworks, right? It's not one company. Like that's just some 10 companies that have been swallowed in, right? But really, that's the reality, right? Whether it's HR, whether it's sales, whether it's customer success, whether it's support, it doesn't matter. It's just all of these companies rolled into one, right? Look at Salesforce, look at Amazon for that matter, look at any of these companies, right, that are up and coming. And I think that's not to say these independent features. I mean, how do you explain PagerDuty or Twilio or any of these other companies then, I guess, right? So yes, there are needs on scale, but at the same time, I do think that a lot of these really massive companies have multiple companies in them that have kind of evolved over time, right? For us, I think the story was a little different. Our journey itself started that way, right? Our journey itself started at a point where it was all of those things coming together, right? It was we had to figure out how somebody will use AI. So think of it, it was a non-existent category for us. That's basically where I'm headed, right? To say that when we started our journey with AI, it was not a category. I still think that it's just barely becoming a category, right? It's going to be massive in the next 10 years, but that for us meant, okay, we have to create this category, right? It doesn't exist out there. We have to go out there and educate people in terms of how is this something, how is AI going to be useful for them? What value are they going to get? So we invested extensively in product marketing. We invested extensively in customer marketing, in customer success, right? These are things we did very early in the growth of the company itself, very, very early in the growth of the company, and became very clear to us that enterprise is the way to go, right? Like you can't put an AI system that most people don't even understand what it's for, right? So, and I think this is the difference between SaaS first companies that use AI as a feature and AI first companies, which is companies like MSD, where we skin the AI with SaaS like features, right? Where SaaS is less of of the tooling and the product, and it's more a representation of the business model that we have, and it's less a representation of the product itself. The product, for me, the skins and the tools that surround the AI is simply a way for the people out there to, manipulate the AI, right? Or experience the AI or integrate it on their side with whatever they want, right? So that's broadly it. And sometimes it's not even like, visible. It's just API. At the API layer, the integrations happen, right? So very different in that sense. And as a result, it had to be, enterprise-led, right? And it became very clear from a dollar value perspective, from a size of the contracts, from the setup that was required to kind of support over time, right? It became very clear that what we were doing, we didn't start out to be that way. I think a few years down the line, we were like, I guess we are an enterprise company. So kind of, more that than like starting out with a particular kind of goal.
I guess it's also, the way I look at it, it's also the journey from building a feature to solve or to accomplish a task versus making your customer successful, right? If you go about the journey pretty meaningfully, then I think everyone will end up being an enterprise company in some sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. The customer was, from the get-go, the entire company was built around, what the customers were telling us, right? Like, by ourselves, our mission was make the world AI native, right? That had to come some hundreds of thousands of layers down for us to kind of convert that into specifics. And that was purely, the entire customer base that we've been working with globally, right? So, yeah.
Right. So, you've already touched upon multiple different facets of building a deep tech and AI startup, right? But given all of the experiences you've had, could you just, summarize some of these lessons? If there's an academic or researcher or a scientist kinds who's listening to the podcast and wants to build a deep tech enterprise startup, what should she or he do or not do, perhaps?
Oh, wow. That's a big one. I would say it takes, that's a good question, but it's also a difficult one because I think it's a slightly emotional one for me too. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. I can tell you that much. I think building SaaS first companies, if you find a use case with a really large market and you don't have to really double down on I don't think you have to build brilliant products if you're building SaaS products. And I know that's a very controversial thing to say, but I'm going to say it. On the other side, I think from a deep tech perspective, it's very different because people forgive people. People don't forgive AI. People don't forgive machines, right? So it's very interesting what people's expectations are of each other versus what people expect out of AI. And so that's a really, really tough thing, I think, if you and if you start to contextualize it in your head and put it in the context that there are different types of deep tech companies you can build. You can build your tools, right? Your MLOps tools, you've got your lots of companies out there, hundreds of companies that are coming up in this zone, right? Which is your classifying tools, labeling tools. You can build all the tooling, right? And the toolkit, the developer tools needed to build AI. That's one group. The hard part there is going to be the ability to stand out. And the reason for that is there's so many of them out there right now, right? It's going to be really hard to kind of carve a place for yourself. The good news, however, is I don't even think people have, we're even 0.001% close to the sheer number of tools we're going to need, right, in the upcoming 10 years. So I think the market is fairly huge, and that's one part. The other kind of AI companies are vertical. They're more like Vue.ai, right? So pick a vertical that's massive and knock yourself out and build AI products there, right? And the third category is more large enterprise platforms, right? And the good news about this segment, the segment that we fall in, is that you don't have too many companies playing in this zone. It's not hyper competitive, but it is extremely difficult. It is very difficult because you're talking about large scale systems that need to come together. And you need to be selling to really large companies that are going to be paying you hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And the kind of work that's required on that front is it's a whole other scale, right? To be able to do that. And the reason I said that, it really does come down to, I do think categories 1 and 2 are easier than category 3. And I would say, for entrepreneurs that are looking to start or are already in this zone, I would say just think about which one of these 3 playbooks you are going to adopt, and then just very religiously adopt that playbook and go down that path, right? And there's opportunities, all these 3 spaces. It's just that at the end of the day with AI, I can tell you, if it's not a customer first thing where you're very clearly, it's very easy with AI to convince yourself that, oh my God, we're doing something magical. And AI can do a lot of magical things, but at the end of the day, magic has to transform into dollar for the customer in some way, right? So it's very important to be grounded in the reality of meaning and value that you're generating for your customers. If that is not measurable across each of these three models, then there is nothing. There is absolutely nothing.
Yeah, a lot of what you're saying is being deliberate about what to build, how to build, and so on, right? And one of those really deliberate things is finding product market fit. And if you've not done it before, I mean, it can be a very daunting path to go down, right? I mean, since you've had a significant experience on that. I mean, you've built multiple products, you've seen that access like a couple of different times. What are some lessons on finding product market fit?
I'll give you that specifically in the context of deep tech. I think the answer is a little different. I think if you look at it as general SaaS versus deep tech, I think there's a lot of writing out there about how do you get to PMF, and I'm not going to go down that path. I think I'll stick to the deep tech story of how do you get to. First thing I would say, investing in a customer success organization very early on is probably the number one thing that I'd suggest for companies that are building deep tech. And the reason I say that is someone who is going to be managing, say you have 3 customers, right? And you have some kind of an AI product that is being integrated into their systems. There's going to be a lot of integration. You have to integrate into their system. Remember, AI is not, unless you're a SaaS, unless you're doing something like copy.ai or any of those guys, right? Where you're generating copy using AI, right? Which is largely, again, yes, it's very core. Without the AI, that SaaS company won't even function, but it doesn't need a whole lot of integration into people's systems, right? You're just asking it to provide, copy that's specific to a context, so on and so forth. Unless you're looking at it as that specific, where the integration itself is not extensive, or you're not really asking someone to give you their entire data. If you are a deep tech company, you're going to have to access your customers' data in some form, right? Like they're going to have to give you their data. You're going to have to. So it's a lot of trust. Everything is about trust, right? So the most important thing with PMF for deep tech companies, number one, I would say, is really, really getting to a point where your customers trust you to be able to give you that data. Because without that data, there is no AI company. Right. So that's the first part, right? The data that your customer you're going to be working with is literally at the heart of the products that you're going to put out, right? So I would say without that, there is no PMF. So really getting to the data question, how are you going to access data? Where are you going to get data from? How are you going to augment the data that's coming? And how do you train your models? So I think anything to do with PMF really starts with how are you going to build your models? Where is your product going to come from, and where is that data going to come from, right? And so this is the number one issue for most deep tech and AI companies. Without figuring this answer out, I don't think you have any PMF of any kind. That's the first part of it. And that's why I said customer success and customer centric, teams have to be invested way ahead of your typical SaaS company. And the reason for that is just this, right? You need to figure out how to work with data that's not yours, and do it in a highly private, highly secure form that you can actually, hold someone's trust to it. So that's one part of it. And if that happens enough number of times, and you start getting, the rest is usual, right? Like you have 5 customers, you got to convince another 5, and then you have 10, you tell another 10, you double, right? Or triple. So then the journey becomes easier. But I think it's really important to get that first few right through the data lens, and that's number one. The second thing about product market fit, I would say, is in the context of all things AI, is I would say value goes back to analytics. I think it's extremely important to have analytics and organizations inside your company, so that you put success metric right up front. Right, success is not one of those things that you're like, oh, I built something really magical for you, right? And so what? It's great 10 times you use it, and then what, right? So really having a team that can constantly show value and ROI is one of those things that I think, and again, the reason why this is so much more important in the context of AI than any other industry, I would say, is because it's invisible, right? Most of what AI does is invisible unless there are some very specific examples that are very obvious. You're automating something that I'm doing in a very, like, again, the copy and the language and text becomes a great example of saying, that's something that's evident in itself. But it's very important. You need to prove to me that me doing this myself or my existing systems are not like that AI is doing, 10x order of magnitude better than what I already have, needs to be established, right? And so value, I would say, is the second kind of pillar of PMF for an AI product or an AI company. And then the last one I would say is just, well, again, it comes down to people for me. It's kind of related to the first point when I was talking about data and customer success. But I think that while people are really used to buying AI now, like there's everybody knows about AI, right? CIOs, CEOs, CTOs, people across, like people know about AI, right? But there are extremely untapped, like we're scratching the surface with deep tech right now, I think, in the industry. You could go down to the path of infra. You could go and do specific vertical feature. You could go and do developer tools. You could do no code, low code tools, right, for business users. There are so many different places that you can go and build AI for. I think we're just getting started, and that's the most exciting part of AI, I think. But I would say that, again, there's a lot of getting carried away with AI that I think that I want to put out there in the context of this. The third pillar really is around, you're not going to get PMF if you get carried away by the magic of the AI. I can tell you that much, right? It's very easy to do so. So the third pillar really comes down to pick the category that you think you as a personality lend yourself really well to. It's really important that as a founder that fit exists for the vertical or the domain that you're going behind. And once you do that, then your entire strategy from the nature of your product, do you even need all the SaaS parts of it? Can you just do API? Do you need anything else? Can you just have developer tools? And just being very true to that, I think, it will get you to PMF faster than anything else.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you listen to any of the CIOs or whatever, right, everyone thinks it's an imperative to invest in AI, but then it's often seen as a shiny new thing. And to make it like business integral is super important, as you mentioned. But oftentimes when you talk to tech folks, right, I mean, it sounds like they're speaking Mandarin or something. They're so caught up with the technology stuff that it's difficult for them to articulate their passion and why this could be really meaningful, right? Why people should give a damn about what they're building. So how important do you think storytelling is for founders, especially building in deep tech and AI? And, how should people develop that skill set?
Yeah, I invest pretty extensively in AI companies, and this is literally one of the first things that I do for them, right? I go and hire marketing teams for them. And the reason I do that is because I think marketing and go-to-market with AI products is less about the magic of the AI, and it's more about investing in saying stories of what it can do for the person on the other side in a very meaningful way, while showing that the point of AI is the 10x order of magnitude, right? The difference it makes. And if your AI doesn't make an order of magnitude, difference to the person on the other side, you should really think twice about whether it's valuable, or if it's that's another sign of PMF, right? If you're not able to be, kind of demonstrate that value, it's quite the problem. But I think it's really important to invest in product marketing to be able to say the stories of your product from a perspective of the solutions, the problems it's solving, how it's solving those problems, the metrics and the analytics and the ROI and the success stories. So in a way, you could argue it's almost the same as hiring for marketing in any B2B. But the difference, however, is the importance of kind of unraveling the AI part of it, right? And it's not just about, and it's about the audience. Are you talking to the developers, in which case you talk very differently? Are you talking to a business buyer, in which case you talk very differently, right? And invariably with AI, the decision maker is either it's super bottoms up or it's super top down, right? It's that's broadly how you sell most of your AI. So investing in storytelling is huge. It's so funny because for the longest time we thought that, in the early stages of the company, at least, right? Like we were getting featured in MIT Tech Review and all those, but it became very clear very soon that at the end of the day, our audience is sitting on Vogue for Vue.ai for our fashion and our retail vertical. Our audience was reading Vogue. Our audience was reading WWD. Our audience was reading certain parts of Forbes. And it became much clearer to us that investing in storytelling in those forums are much more important than investing in storytelling in a place like MIT Tech Review, right? And it's not an either or as much as go where your customer is, right, at the end of the day, and say the stories that your customer wants to hear. And it's less of a storytelling for the vanity of the AI, that your company expects to be doing. And it's more about the fact that you want to tell your customers some very meaningful stories about why they need to care about AI, right? Which means you got to go where they are. So investing in storytelling is massive, massive. And finding the right kind of salespeople, that's a whole other, I could do a 1 hour session just on that. But finding salespeople who can truly match that gap between where the world is now and what you will get if AI gets into your company in a certain way, and helping people make that jump from here to there, I think is that's a skill set unto itself, right? Because it's not a product. You're not opening a product, telling them about a problem that they've been having for like 20 years, and then it's not that, because it's a space that doesn't necessarily exist. But people feel those problems. It's almost like saying it's the classic Uber example, right? Like nobody knew they needed Uber. Nobody knew they needed Airbnb. Nobody knows they need AI. I mean, they're constantly being told that they need AI, but nobody knows why, right? So to be able to suddenly say, hey, you've been doing this wrong for like 20 years now. Let's look at all. It's a very hard, kind of transition and story to tell people. And it's really important to help kind of convey that, right? And so storytelling is absolutely center to building companies around AI.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, you're painting a picture in essence, right? I mean, something that doesn't exist, and you're kind of envisioning there tomorrow, so to speak. There's also a fundamental change in terms of, enterprise applications itself. I mean, I've still used legacy applications where even if users and customers wanted to change, there was just a mile in between that, right? I mean, there's simply so much of change management involved and so on and so forth. Versus right now, if you look at SaaS, for example, it's built on customer love, right? I mean, you give the ultimate power to the customer to kind of switch on and switch off. And so it's important to focus on your customer success, which is something that you've mentioned earlier as well. And it's not just one function's responsibility. You basically get a lot of people to rally around this mission, right? So I wonder, how do you set up these teams to sort of empower the customer? So how do you set up your product, your marketing, and your customer success, all of them to work for the end goal of the customer success as such?
Yeah. We used to do these offsites, annual offsites. And the last one we did was in 2019, December, before, a couple of months before all things COVID hit us. And one of the key themes we covered at that offsite was about what is it going to mean for us to make that customer-centric transition, as we are, we're shifting from tens of customers to hundreds of customers as we kind of go through that transition. And the answer became very evident, right? We were clearly, by being an enterprise company, which again, like I said, was something that we reflected upon rather than very naturally went about doing in a very planned way. We'd realized that the only way we had been an enterprise company was by being customer centric, right? I think these two are just completely hand in hand. You cannot treat an enterprise customer like a customer that just comes and then self-serves a product, right? And I know that the holy grail of life right now is product-led growth in the SaaS world and everything being self-serve. I think that is the holy grail right now. I still think we operate in the exact opposite end of the world, where there are people on the other side, and it's extremely important to do anything, whether it's building our product or selling the product or integrating it or staying through with the customer through the lifetime of that product, right? For us, everything is about the people on the other side. And the reason it is all the more of a reason because AI is so complex. It's extremely important for the person on the other side to feel like there is a white glove treatment at all points of time, right? And we'd already been doing that, very naturally already been doing that, given we were an enterprise, centric company to begin with. And over the last couple of years, we spent a lot of time, building onboarding teams, customer onboarding team, like really mapping out our entire journey and saying, pre-sales, sales, post-sales, right? RevOps comes in the middle, and then you've got onboarding the customer. And then once you onboard the customer, you're fully integrating. And then once integration's done, they move into your quarterly business reviews, your monthly business reviews, your annual reviews, right? Like we literally mapped out that whole journey and said that, and then the people are buying more and more and more from you, right? Every 3 months. All our products are literally built with our customers. Every time we're building a new product, it's a continuous cycle with the existing hundreds of customers that we have, that we go through to build new products, new features. So at some level, I think we're at that point right now where we don't have to ask that question of what it means to be customer centric, because I feel like we're there. Like the systems have been designed for it to constantly have the customer at the center. But it requires an effort and process and people and teams to be built. And at the end of the day, the best way to do that is by mapping that entire journey for your company. And every company's customer journey is a little different. So mapping your journey as a company with your customers, and then kind of mapping out those key milestones, the teams that are needed to do each of those things, the continuity across all those people, right? And really just building the different orgs that do that.
Right. So that segues well into the next question that I had on hiring. You had a pretty interesting thread on Twitter some time back about the market being crazy, right? And literally anyone half decent has about 2 or 3 offers, right? So how do you hire in this crazy market?
I think it's a fantastic thing that the market is going so nuts. I know that's an unpopular opinion amongst most founders right now, but I think this was coming. Right, this was coming for a while. The startup market is going crazy. Of course, the talent market is equally going crazy, right? I mean, the number of unicorns you have every day, the number of funding rounds that are happening every day, it's definitely beginning to feel like, a whole other, season of the valley in the valley. But it's beginning to feel that way, right? And obviously, the talent market has to grow along with it, right? And this is why. I do think it's crazy. I mean, there are people with like 1 year experience, 2 year experience, like commanding what your 7, 8 year experienced person is asking for. So I do think that the salaries are out of control because, again, companies are being funded and they can throw that money right now, right? But it's not the most sustainable way to build anything. I mean, that money is going to run out at some point, and then what do you do, right? So there are, so there's ups and downs to this, and I think the ups all revolve around the fact that everybody has access, right? And sure, there are lots of companies that are not going to be, people who are not raising those kinds of funds and have that kind of money to throw are definitely going to be hurting a lot more and it in a more disadvantaged place. I do think that. But the market is full of talent, right? And I think it's important everybody finds creative ways to hire, right? Like, and really grow. Investing in training people is literally the number one thing that I think every company should just take the time to do, right? And it has to become a sort of a pipeline, right? Have a trainee pipeline, get people to their first year, get people into their second year, right? And so on and so forth. And I think every company has to have its own version of that, right? So the market itself is crazy. I think we are yet to see out of control. As bad as it is right now, I still think we are yet to see out of control. And I think it is going to get worse, in my opinion. I don't think we've seen the worst part of it yet. But then again, I think it's a great opportunity for us to, my secret hope is that this will force startups to start thinking about hiring women. Shocking that I brought it up. But and the reason I say that is because that's literally like one gender that you just like not even considering. Most startups don't have enough representation in any form, but it's just silly in a way because that's a lot of people out there that you can get if you simply just figured out a way to do that. I also hope that this means, startups will differentiate with things like daycare and childcare and better, kind of environment for the people in their company. And these are all fantastic things to kind of prove to the talent out there that, you care as a company. So I'm hoping that this just means floating all boats. And hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, that's such a low-hanging fruit. I mean, if you ask me, for companies, right, to be seen as inclusive and so on, I think
Yeah,
makes a huge difference. Um, I have to talk about the period that we are operating in, which is, COVID, and it's been a very challenging time for all of us, personally,
yeah,
professionally. But we also discovered an unbelievable amount of resilience and innovation in the way we do things, right? And the sector that you operate in, retail, for example, was very hard, was hit very hard, right? I mean, perhaps the
yeah,
worst affected, I would say, right? So
yeah,
what was it like working with customers during this time? I mean, how do you empathize with their needs, and
yeah,
um, what have you learned from this experience?
yeah. Resilience. That's what I've learned. I think at the end of the day, I would argue the COVID period has made us one of the like we are stronger than we ever believed we could be as a company at MSD. To be honest with you, we lost so many of our customers just to bankruptcy early last year, and it was a bloodbath. It was just absolutely just a nightmare in some ways. But at the same time, I think the other side of it, which is an unintended consequences, everybody started going online, right? 75% of the world's apparel sales is online today. 75%, right? Like that's an insane number. Like it's 2021 and 75% of the world's apparel gets bought online. So
Yeah.
the other ended up, so while we ended up, going through that, on the other hand, like online sales rocketed, which meant automatically, our products ended up selling really well. And we ended up going on to have some of the best quarters we've had. But that said, I mean, for us, it was really about spending time with our customers, just saying hi, hello, like, picking up the phone, the customer success reps calling people on the other side and finding out how they are. I connected with a lot of the CEOs in different companies to find out if there's something we can do for them, right? Like anything that we can take on extra, products that can help them, for free if required, right? So I think there are different and the thing is, like, different geos got hurt at different points of time. We had customers in Chile, in Argentina, in Brazil, in Mexico, the US, Japan, across the board, right? And different countries got affected at different points in time. So I think at some level, being able to be there for your customer, there's people remember that stuff, right? And I think asking yourself, what am I losing in the short term, but what am I gaining in the long term? And that's why, while I do believe that the product led growth movement of SaaS is really going to take off, I still believe that enterprise is here to stay, and enterprise is here to stay in a very big bad way. And the reason for it is people, right? That's what it is.
I personally feel the product-led growth stuff is overrated. I mean, maybe for a certain section, I mean, it makes sense, I would say, but ultimately, I think people do want to talk to people and buy from people for anything that's a little more integral to their business, I would argue, right? So, you spoke about investing in startups, advising startups, and so on, and we're in the middle of like this giant SaaS wave in India, and I think we've finally figured the playbook to pivot from services to products. And I think it's the convergence of a variety of things, right? Whether it's cloud or payment infrastructure, or so on. But it's also reflecting of the maturing of the system, right? This ecosystem,
Yeah,
basically, because there's a precedence for everything right now in terms of like, how do I hire a salesperson, how do I do go to market,
yeah, yeah,
and so on and so
absolutely.
forth, right? So you have all of these playbooks and benchmarks and metrics to help founders like really sort of act like a moral compass and augment them to the virtuous path, right?
Yeah.
So how have you seen this ecosystem develop, and your thoughts in general about founders that you're talking to these days?
Well, it's pretty amazing to begin with. I think that change has been talking about it for years now, and I think it's come 100% arrived. And I think it's also a culmination of a lot of things. It's a classic, I think, cycle that every economy, every ecosystem has to go through, right? 5 years ago, you couldn't find product marketers, you couldn't find product managers. Look at how it is today, right? So I think it's also a skill set gap. There were lots of these early companies that seeded those skill sets, that trained those skill sets, that got all of those people ready for the market. So in some ways, I think what we're also seeing is the coming together of talent that's been nurtured and grown in the early stages, and now it's kind of spawning off, right? Like there are lots of, and there's enough of them to start seeing kind of a lot of companies being formed. So I think there's a bit of that that's happened just in terms of availability of talent and the ability to kind of grow SaaS companies. I think we're at that nice kind of place right now. The other thing, of course, is like you pointed out, right? There's been enough number of times that this has been cut, copy, pasted now that we now know the playbooks are set in place, and it's very easy to go and get a company up and running and, to about 5 million, like fairly quickly, I would argue, right? Scale, on the other hand, I do think that that's something that we have to prove in the next, few years. I don't think there are more than, I think there are fewer than, if I remember the SaaS Boomi number, I think there are fewer than 50 companies that have crossed 10 mil, if I remember right. So I do think that journey has to come still in terms of being able to scale. So hopefully the next 5 years will be all about seeing more of those companies that can kind of get to scale, not just up to that 10, right? So I think very exciting. It's incredibly exciting on both the talent as well as just the sheer scale of ideas and the fact that everybody's building globally, right? Like, yeah, sure, I think you end up hearing a lot of this Bharat stuff all the time, but I think from India to the world is something that's, I don't know, looks like fairly the norm now. It's not even like a big new thing anymore.
Yeah, no, a lot of the companies are just global from day one, right? So
yeah.
I think the aspirations have also grown that much, I suppose. So, this has been a fascinating conversation, Ashwini. Thank you so much again for being on the podcast. A lot of insights and learnings for me personally. Before we let you go, final question for all the founders who are listening to the podcast, who are doing their 0 to 1 journey at their startups, some parting thoughts. What is your advice to them?
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I just say with my daughter was just walking and she'd probably break out into that song and do a little number for you. I think it's the truth. I mean, I think, and Jason, nobody other than Jason Lumpkin puts it so well, right? Yeah. It's just like, keep at it. It's just going to get there. And sometimes suddenly one day you sit up and it compounds, right? I think this journey is simply a story of resilience and of nothing else, right? And it feels like most days are just bleak, but you keep at it and it all adds up. It all adds up and it becomes something much bigger. And so I would say just resilience, that's it. Just when your eyes are on all the right things, which is not always funding and all the jazz and the limelight, if your eyes are on the right thing, which is the business you're building and the outcome of the business you're building, it all adds up eventually.
Right. That's a great note to end the podcast on. Thank you again and look forward to talking to you again sometime. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform and share this episode with all of your fellow startup operators. Also follow the Startup Operator on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon on a brand new episode of the Startup Operator.